All right, let's dive into one of the biggest economic puzzles of 2025. It's a story about a trade war that, well, didn't really go as planned, and a global realignment that happened way faster than almost anyone saw coming. And it all comes down to this one number, a number that just shouldn't exist.
$1.189 trillion. That was China's total trade surplus in 2025, a new record. Now, if you were reading the news back then, you'd be scratching your head. This number makes no sense, right? The whole idea was that the Chinese export machine was supposed to be completely seizing up because of this massive trade war.
So yeah, how on earth did that happen? And the answer is pretty wild. It's not that China won the trade war in the traditional sense. It's that they just stopped playing. They decided to build a whole new game on their own terms. Okay, let's break it down.
Okay, so to really get what China did, we have to go back to the beginning of 2025 and understand the absolute shockwave that hit the global economy. And believe me, this wasn't just another slap on the wrist with tariffs. No, this was a full-on attempt to break the supply chains.
It all kicked off in February 2025. A blanket 10% U.S. tariff on everything coming from China. But that was just the appetizer. Then came new Section 301 actions, hitting supercritical sectors like shipping, logistics, the works. By the middle of the year, the pressure was just immense. We're talking an effective tariff rate of 57%. 57! That's not a tax, that's a blockade, a giant wall.
And yeah, the economic pain got so bad it pushed both sides to sit down and talk. That's how we got the Kuala Lumpur Agreement in November. Now, on the surface, it looked like everyone was cooling off. The US backed down a little, China paused its own tariffs, but here's the twist, and this is the crucial part. This was not a peace treaty. It was a timeout. And for Beijing, it was the perfect cover to hit the accelerator on their Plan B.
And this, Plan B, this is the key to the whole puzzle. You see, the plan wasn't to figure out how to sneak goods past the US tariff wall. No, it was much bigger. It was about making that wall completely irrelevant. And they did it by building these brand new economic partnerships, these anchors all across the global south. And the very first one, the big one, was right next door.
So here it is, strategic anchor number 1, ASEAN. And look, the trade numbers are huge, almost $1 trillion. But that's not even the real story. The real story is the system they built, called AFCFTA 3.0. This agreement, it's not about making shoes a little cheaper. It's about writing the rulebook for the future. We're talking e-commerce, green energy, the whole 9 yards. They created a single economic zone with China right in the middle. Think about it this way. China is building the entire region's economic operating system.
And you can see exactly how this plays out in practice. It's a two-pronged approach, really. On one side, you've got Vietnam acting as this tech conduit, right? Chinese parts pour in, they get assembled, and then boom, they're exported as made in Vietnam, neatly sidestepping those US tariffs. But then on the other side, you have something way more sophisticated happening in Indonesia. It's becoming a massive EV hub with a huge $1.3 billion BYD plant at its core. So you see, China's not just selling cars anymore, they're exporting the entire industry.
Okay, so with Southeast Asia locked down as its industrial base, China moved on to the next parts of the plan. First, secure the energy and resources to keep the factories running. Second, find brand new markets for all their high-tech stuff.
Enter the Gulf. China came in with a totally new deal. The old deal, for decades, was simple. U.S. security in exchange for oil. China's new deal? Chinese technology in exchange for energy. As these Gulf nations are racing to modernize, China's right there, ready to build their entire digital foundation. We're talking AI, cloud, everything. And with their big free trade deal nearly done, Chinese tech giants like Huawei are becoming deeply embedded, basically building the digital operating system for huge projects like Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030.
Then we have the third anchor, Latin America. And the big moment here was the Xi-Lula summit in Brazil. They signed 37 deals, and listen, this was not just about buying more soybeans. This was about deep industrial partnership, weaving Brazil's own industrial ambitions right into China's supply chains. And one of the cleverest moves? A deal for a Chinese satellite company to provide internet. That is a direct shot at American tech, specifically Starlink, in a place the US has always considered its own backyard.
But the strategy in Mexico? Wow, that's where things get really bold. This transshipment loophole is the perfect way to describe it. While the US was busy building this massive tariff wall on its southern border, Chinese money and parts were flooding into Mexico, setting up new factories. And what's the end result? You get finished products that can then enter the US, maybe with a different label, completely bypassing the wall. It's like they're literally tunneling right underneath it.
And if you follow the money, it's just mind-boggling. On paper, officially, China invested about $450 million in Mexico. But the real number, when you dig through all the shell companies and joint ventures, it's more than double that. Over $1.1 billion. It's this phantom FDI, this hidden cash, that's funding the whole tunneling operation. And the result? A jaw-dropping 2,367% jump in Chinese EV exports to Mexico in a single year.
Okay, so let's recap. You've got your new industrial base in ASEAN. You've got new markets all over the global south. But there's a problem. How do you connect all the dots? How do you move the money around without using the Western financial system, which is controlled by your rival? Well, the answer is you build your own system, your own financial plumbing, and this, right here, is the secret weapon that makes this whole parallel world tick.
It's a system called CIPS. That stands for Cross-Border Interbank Payment System. The easiest way to think about it is that it's China's version of SWIFT. It's basically a network that lets banks all over the world make payments to each other directly in Chinese yuan. The key thing is, it totally bypasses the US dollar and the entire Western financial system.
And in 2025, this thing just blew up. The value of transactions flowing through it jumped by over 42%. CIPS is essentially paving these new, direct financial highways between China and its partners in ASEAN, the Gulf, everywhere. And what that means is that a huge and growing chunk of global trade is now happening completely off the radar of US financial regulators.
And it's really cool to see how this actually works in the real world. A perfect example is the Standard Bank milestone in November 2025. They became the first African bank to plug directly into CIPS. So what does that mean? It means a company in, say, Kenya, buying something from China, doesn't need to have their payment go through a bank in New York City anymore. The US dollar is just gone from the equation. It makes things cheaper, and it takes away a huge point of leverage for the US.
And the last piece of this financial puzzle is something called currency swaps. Think of these like a financial safety net. China's central bank has set up these huge swap lines with major partners, Saudi Arabia, even the European Central Bank. It's basically an insurance policy. It guarantees that even if there's a major financial crisis, these countries will always have the yuan they need to trade with China. And that makes the US dollar, maybe for the first time ever, truly optional.
So, let's bring it all back to that mystery number we started with, that $1.189 trillion. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't a fluke, it was the direct result of China deliberately rerouting the entire global economy. The big takeaway here is that the tariffs didn't actually isolate China. They just hit the fast-forward button on a world that was already splitting in two.
And you know what? This has opened up a whole new can of worms for the West. The US built this tariff wall. You could almost think of it like the Maginot Line, but China just went around it, or tunneled under it. And as more and more trade moves onto these new financial tracks, the West is basically flying blind. They can't see what's happening. Meanwhile, as China sets the tech standards in places like the Gulf, that traditional American influence, well, it's just melting away.
So, the big picture here is that we are now living in a split reality. Two separate worlds. The West is still the king of things like high-end chip design and old-school finance, for sure. But running right alongside it, China has built this totally separate, resilient, digital economic system with the global South. 2025 wasn't just a weird year. It was the year that this split became, for all intents and purposes, permanent.
And I want to leave you with this one last, pretty provocative thought from the report that kicked off this whole explainer. It says, the global South is increasingly synonymous with the Chinese sphere of influence. Wow. That's a pretty stark way to put it, and it suggests the economic map of the world as we knew it has been completely and maybe permanently redrawn.